Hello and welcome to Software Pulse Building Java Desktop Applications, and I'm John McNeil. In this video we're going to take a look at extending our REST API video that we did in a previous session. I'll put the link down below so that if you missed that you have a chance to see what we did in the earlier session, because we're going to be building on that today. So in the last session what we did was we created a series of endpoints for our REST API that all were called using the GET HTTP method. Today what we're going to do is we're going to extend that REST API and add in a number of post calls which will allow us to send objects as part of the body of the message to our REST API and receive and we'll also receive objects back from in response to our calls. And then we'll finish off by adding in some basic authentication onto the REST API, just so as an example of how you could implement a simple authentication mechanism to your REST API. So that said, let's go take a look at just checking that our server's up and running and our REST API is available by calling some of the methods that we did last time and showing you what we're going to end up with when we finish coding in this video. So I'm going to use SOAPUI for this. Previously, in the previous video, we just used the URL bar of the web browser, but because we're going to be doing some post calls, I'm going to use SOAPUI. There's a tool called Postman, I think it's called, if I've got the name right off the top of my head, which is also a very good product for doing this sort of work. So if you're familiar with that, maybe you'd like to take a look at using that one. But for today, I'm going to be using SOAPUI. So let's just pull up what we did last time. So last time we did a get method call. Our server is on our local host and it's on port 8080, and our endpoint for our REST API is people/people, and the default endpoint for the service is employees. So if I just call that, I'm expecting to get John McNeil come back as a response. There we are, there's John McNeil. So that's that. What we're going to add on to that today is a post request. Now, the advantage of doing a post is instead of sending information as parameters on the URL bar or as a variable within the URI, which we took a look at in the previous video, link down below, you can pass more complex data in the body of your request. So here I've got a JSON object with a name, a gender and an age, and I'm going to pass that across to my my REST API using this post call, and it's simply going to return the name back to me. So there we are, send person and G McNeil, and if I change that to Andrew, I'll get Andrew McNeil. So that's us posting this block of data over to our REST API. Then this one, JSON person, what we're going to do is we're going to post a JSON object, this JSON object here, over to the endpoint, and what we'll expect to get back is another JSON object. Now it's come up with user cannot access resource, and this is because I've added some security onto this particular endpoint. So what we need to do is we need to go here and we need to select our basic authentication, but I'm going to make sure I've got the password wrong, so I still cannot get in. And now if I correct my password, I've got the same JSON object that I sent reflected back to me. So that's sending and receiving a JSON object. And then we've got another one here, which is wild person. So what we've got here is we're going to send this set of data across to our wild person endpoint. And if we get it right, we will expect to get that information back like we have here. So if I just check I've got no authentication switched on. So when I call it this time, I don't get what I sent. I got a different object back. So if I now go and switch on my basic authentication and check I got the password right, now I have got the information back. I sent Simon Quark, male 55, and that's what I got back. And now if I go and get my password wrong and I pass it, I get this Paula Wilkins again. And what this is doing is it's checking to see whether you're authenticated, and if you're authenticated, it will return the object you sent, and if you're not authenticated, it's simply going to return some random value back to you. It's not random value, it's the same value every time, but it's just a made up value. So they're the three endpoints we're going to look at deploying, and I'll show you two ways of adding in basic authentication into your REST API on the server side. And you've already just seen there demonstrated how we would add in the authentication credentials on the call. So let's switch to our Eclipse IDE and pick up our project from where we left off. So here we are. What we had was our default endpoint for our REST API is employees, and so it would run this show person name method here by default. Then we had some other endpoints here, and on the bottom here we're going to add in our new endpoint. But before we start that, what I am doing, all those JSON objects I was sending, or all those data items I was sending in a JSON object, all go into a plain old Java object. And that's what we need to create first to hold the values we send. So I'm just going to create a new class, which I'm going to call person. And I'm just going to paste in a whole load of code. So we've got three properties within our class. We've got age, which is an integer, gender, which is a string, and name, which is a string. And then we've got getters and setters for each one of those values. And we've got a default constructor, but it sets up name, gender to both be empty strings and age set to 0. And that just avoids us having any null values in that our variables point to. So that's quite simple, basic object. Done. So now we come back to our people resources, and we will add in the first of our post methods. So I have to import the post, which is the jakarta.ws.js package, and I've got to import the @produces from the same package, and the media type, which is from the jakarta.ws.rs.core package. So the @post tells us it's going to be a post call as opposed to a @get, which is a get call. The path we've done in the previous video. See a link below for previous video. And @produces tells the server and the invoker, anyone who calls the endpoint, that they're going to get text back, plain text back as a response. And all we're doing is we receive some data which we feed into our person object that we've just created, and then we just return send person : space followed by whatever was in the get name part of the person object that we have sent. So that's nice and simple, hopefully. The other one I'm going to put in right for now is the next one, JSON person. And as you can see, now I've got an consumes directive in there. And that's basically just telling the web service that we're expecting to receive a JSON value sent to us. I didn't use it up here. You don't need to use it, and some people will argue that you shouldn't use it. But I'm just showing you that you have the option to be able to specify these values if you're trying to set something up specifically. I'm just going to comment out these two lines because I don't need them. So when we get sent the person object, all we're going to do is reflect the person object back to the invoker. And that's that. So, and the third one is wild person. Now, this still has a consumes in there, which we're familiar with, but it's got this now at header parameter authorization. So I'm just going to import the at header parameter. There we are. And what it's doing is it's saying, get the header parameter that's called authorization and assign it to this auth string here. But I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. No, I won't. I'll talk a bit more about it now. So what the auth string is doing is it will contain the username and password bits of information that we want. And so what we're going to do is, so long as we've got a value, we're going to call a private method that we haven't yet created called isUserAuthenticated and pass it the auth string. And then we will parse that information and we'll decode and parse that information and return true if there's a match and return false if there's not. If we return true, then we'll simply mirror reflect back the person object we were sent. If it's not, this is where we set up the other object, this Paula Wilkins object that we return if we are unable to authenticate. So that's how that works. So what we're going to do now is we are going to create the isUserAuthenticated method here. Now, normally I would put this item at the top of my class, but just for now, I'm going to put this private static final string authorization header prefix basic here. I'm going to change that to auth token. That's better. Okay. So what we're going to do is, in this auth token, we'll have a value called basic with a space, and then after that, there will be the value that we're interested in. So we just want to strip that out. So that's all we're doing on this line here, is we're just stripping out that basic value. Then what we're going to do is we are going to decode the bytes that are in auth token, that remain in auth token, into a byte array. And then we are going to create a string from that decoded bytes using UTF-8. And then we are going to, and that will give us our username and our password separated with a colon. So we're going to then use the string tokenizer to get everything to the left of that colon and everything to the right of that colon into our string tokenizer, and then we can get the first item into the username and the second item into the password. And if we have an error, then we'll throw an unsupported encoding exception and just print the stack trace. We're not interested in handling it. And then when we get down to here, we've got the username and password. Now, normally you would send that off to your authentication management system, which would take care of working out whether the username and password were something that we knew about or not. Obviously, for this quick demo, I'm just hard coding a value as the username and hard coding a value as the password. And you'll have heard it 100 times before. Don't do that in any system you're actually going to use. But then if there's a match, so if the username equals John McNeil and the password equals let me in, then return true, otherwise return false. So that's how the wild person works. But we're also going to add authentication onto the JSON person. And how we're going to do that is we're going to create another class. And we're going to call this security filter, and we're going to add, there it is, container request filter. We're going to add container request filter, and then we'll just press finish, and that will do that. And then I just want to put at provider up here, and I have to import that. Okay, and what we are doing here is every one of these endpoints you call to our REST API, they will all be first redirected to this security filter, and they'll go through this filter, public filter method, and be processed. And what we're going to code in here now is a check to find out whether the endpoint that has been called has JSON in its URI. If it's got JSON in its URI, then we're going to check for authentication. Otherwise, we're going to let it pass through. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So we've introduced 3 private static final strings. One is authorization header, and that just tells us says we want to get hold of the authorization part of the header. Obviously, like we did previously, we want to strip out the basic part, and the JSON part here is the bit we're searching for in the URI. So we get the URI info, we get the path, and then we check to see whether it contains JSON. Only if it contains JSON are we going to do the rest. And if it does contain JSON, then what we're going to do is add that Java util list in there. We are going to get a list of the authorization header key items. So we're looking for the header tag authorization, and getting all the items under authorization and putting them into this auth header list. Then we're checking to make sure it's not null, and we're also checking to make sure it's got a size greater than 0, because obviously we don't want to process it if it's null, and if there's nothing in it, if there's no items in it, we also don't want to process it. So then what we're going to do is very much like you've just seen us do. We're going to strip out the basic value and put an empty string in there. Then we're going to do the base64 decode. Then we're going to do the string tokenizer to get either side of the colon, which will give us a username and a password, and then we're going to match with Paul Smith and password. Again, you would obviously call your authentication engine to take care of passing those values. You wouldn't do it this way. And if we don't get a match, then we're going to send a jakarta.ws.rs.core response to just basically say the user cannot access the resource, and then we're going to abort with an unauthorized exception. And there we are. So everything comes through here, but we're only going to check whether if it's got JSON, then everything else drops through. But if wild person is called, although it will drop through, it will then call this is user authenticated and authenticate using this other system here. All the others will just work. So that's what we've done. Just so that I can, so we know we've got something different, I'm going to go male 23 and Joe Wilkins is there. Yeah. And I'm going to return get gender instead of get name. Okay. So what I'll do is I will build my class. And now it's built, I will copy this to somewhere I can find easily. And then I will come here and I will delete this, and I will deploy my new one. There we are. And now we should be able to go to SOAPUI. We'll just check with a basic employees. I should have actually changed that. Oh, the one I've got here has changed because it's got 3 dots on the end. Okay, so that's working. So we know that's working. So now we've got our basic oh yeah, I forgot we changed it to gender, so we've got male. So that's working. Our send person is working. Now we've got our wild person. So first of all, I'm going to go with no authentication, see what we get. We got Joe Wilkins. Let's have a look. Yes, Joe Wilkins, because we failed to authenticate, so we get the made up one. And now if we go with basic authentication but the wrong password, we'll go with the right password, which is let me in. There we are, we've got Simon Quark. And now if we go with the wrong password, we're back to Joe Wilkins, so that's working. And then here we've got the content you're trying. Oh yeah, let's go there. The user cannot access the resource. And if we now go back to basic authentication, we'll get our object that we sent. So there we are. That is adding some post methods, sending some objects from your client, from your caller up to your REST API, and getting objects from your REST API back to the caller, and adding some basic authentication. I do want to talk a bit more about basic authentication in general, but I'll do that in another video. For now, I hope you found it interesting and enjoyable, and if so, look out for the next one in the series. This is Software Pulse, building Java desktop applications, and I'm John McNeil. Thank you for watching.